guys, welcome to the Green Malt, and this is Whiskey Review number 9, video number 10, but Whiskey Review number 9. I'm Chris, and I'm going to try to get this in while I got a little bit of sunlight left. I have a terrible habit of rambling too long about things, so I'm going to really try to nail this down. Anyway, unlike the last review, I only have one bottle in front of me, so it should be easier to keep it shorter, you would think. But time will tell. So when I started this video, and as I mentioned in the last one, the Glenfiddich 12 versus 15, I intended to make this as a kind of whiskey journey, starting out with some of the really easy, approachable whiskeys that you might want to give to somebody who's trying to get into Scotch world for the first time, and then build out from there, adding a little bit more complexity. Hopefully not ramping up the price point too much, but getting into things that you might be investing a little bit more money and time into. And if that's the case, well, I've done a few really easy ones now. The Aberlours, the Obens, certainly the Glenfiddich 12-year-old. So what's the next step then beyond that? I would suggest that something like the Highland Park 12-year-old is a fantastic next progression into single malt whiskey. It's technically a Highland Park whiskey, but is located way up north in the Orkney Islands. So unsurprisingly, it might share some characteristics more with an island whiskey, not an Islay whiskey, but an island whiskey than the Highland whiskey. But I don't know how much stock these days you can put into regional designations anymore. So many distillers are trying to branch out and get away from those traditional pigeonholed ideas about what a specific region's whiskey needs to taste like. So I don't really know the value of any of that. I mean, the important thing to know is that this is an extremely northernly located distillery. In fact, it was the most northern distillery operating in Scotland. It still might be. I think there's been one that's opened up on the Shetland Islands, but I don't know if they're producing any aged alcohol yet. I think they might just be doing unaged stuff, gin and whatnot. So for the moment, we'll say this is the most northerly one. It's also very old. It's, depending on who you believe, either from the end of the 18th century or into the early 19th century that it was founded, and it's still operating. And they do a lot of some really interesting traditional things there. They still malt their own barley, which is rarely done anymore. I mean, you have it done at industrial malting facilities. Not many distilleries have the floor space or the manpower and wherewithal to hand turn and malt your own barley. Highland Park is one of those. Springbank is famously another one. Again, I don't know whether or not these traditional techniques really impart any more quality into the whiskey than an automated process, but if nothing else, it adds a little bit of variation. It maintains some of the traditions, which is also very cool. And I think anytime you have that little bit of variation in the process, as we talked about with Ben Romick, you get some interesting things coming out of it, and you don't get the same kind of homogeneous, boring products that you might get if everything is computer automated all the way through. So, anyway. The other thing to know about Highland Park is that because of where they're located, they really like to put forward the Viking heritage of the Orkney Islands, right? Much like the Shetland Islands, those northerly islands in Scotland, a lot of those Scandinavian explorers and invaders through the centuries spent a lot of time moving through those areas of the world before they came down south into mainland Scotland and the UK in general. So there's a lot of influence from that part of the world in those islands, and you see it in some of the artwork. You certainly see it on a lot of the limited releases that Highland Park puts out, which I find interesting personally, because when you really put forward that Viking character, you would expect a really aggressive, strong whiskey, I guess, in some respects, but you don't really get that, at least not from the 12-year-old. 12-year-old is very subtle and delicate beast. So it's not one that you would really associate with that Viking iconography necessarily. It retails for about $80 here in Ontario, and to put that into some worldwide context, 12-year-old single malts here in Ontario tend to retail, if you're lucky, you'll go as low as $60, but more regularly it can go up to about $100 or slightly more. So $80 is right in that mid-range. I understand in the past that Highland Park 12-year-old might have been one of the best value propositions on the market, but I think they've gained a little bit too much notoriety to keep their price points down anymore. So they've earned the right to bump up those prices now, and I think it's still an okay value. I don't know if it's great anymore, but I'm still happy to buy a bottle and have it in the cabinet. It's bottled at 43%. It's probably, well, I think it's almost certainly colored and chill filtered, but hey, c'est la vie. And yeah, on with the show. So as I mentioned, delicate, I think, is the #1 word to really associate with this particular whiskey. It's very sweet, but subtle. And by point of comparison, maybe the Glenfiddich 12-year-old, pardon me, in many ways is also similar on the nose. It's difficult for somebody like me, anyway, to pick out particular flavor notes. But if I had to describe the experience of nosing the Highland Park 12-year-old versus the Glenfiddich 12-year-old, well, the Glenfiddich is, say, unspecific. It seems a little bit muddled to me. The Highland Park is just subtle. It's almost as if you can sense that those specific notes are there, but trying to pull them out is, it's not easy. It might be a little bit beyond somebody in my limited experience, though great enthusiasm. Sweet, toffeed, lightly smoked. Lightly smoked. It's like sitting at a campfire in a distance, right? So you can get, every time the wind shifts, you get an impression of the smoke in the air, but you're not getting inundated with it by being too close. So very lightly smoked. Not quite grassy. I mean, heathery, I guess. I mean, floral. I mean, floral is the #1 word I always use to describe this, or at least when I think about it, this what I associate with this, because of that light, sweet character. Well, not because of, but in association with. None of the sea salt I would expect on the nose necessarily, nor none of the fruit notes I would expect on the nose, to be honest with you. Highland Park is a little bit cagey about how exactly this particular expression is aged and bottled, but from what I can determine, it seems to be supposedly largely aged in sherry butts. And usually I expect to get a little bit more of that dark fruit chocolate kind of note out of sherry aged whiskeys, and I don't really get any of that. I get very little fruit in general. Don't really get yeah, any fruit. So yeah, sweet, smoky, a little bit grassy, heathery, floral, and on to the taste. Yeah, okay, so there it is. As with the nose, immediately sweet toffee. The smoke hits you right away and dissipates. Like, it does not stick around. There's a little bit of oaky spice to it that I didn't get on the nose at all. Hesitant to call it peppery because it's not. It's a very light spice, but noticeable. So what's a light pepper? Is it maybe a white pepper? Little bit of underlying chocolate. More so through the finish, but I'm getting ahead of myself there. By the time those floral notes come through on the development, because the sweetness, toffee sweetness, and the smokiness is so predominant immediately on the arrival, and then kind of doesn't stick around very long. By the time you get to the floral notes, they're really just there with that light, spicy, and underlying chocolatey. But it's not as sweet as you would expect based on the nose. So for me, anyway, I would describe that more as a grassy note than a floral note, personally. And it lingers a little bit, not too terribly long. And then mostly into the finish is that light chocolatey, slightly spicy note. Yeah. So I don't know how many, to be honest with you, flavor notes I could really put forward and try to keep a straight face doing it, because this is a tough one for me to pick apart. At the best of times, I would only describe myself as mediocre, trying to pull out tasting notes out of a whiskey, and this one is so subtle and delicate in the way it presents any of those notes that I would be doing anyone else a disservice to try to dig much deeper than that. But the important thing to know is that it's very well balanced. It presents a lot of different looks at you. I don't know if that made a lot of sense. But you'll get the sweetness versus a light smokiness. Then you'll get a little bit of that heathery or grassy note against a little bit of light chocolate or light spice. So it balances off one note against another very well. That's why it's a very easy drinking whiskey, while being a little bit more complex than some of the other approachable whiskeys I talked about already. It's a great next step for anyone then that wants to expand their Scotch horizons, because it'll challenge the heck out of you if you want to really try to pick it apart from a tasting note perspective. But if you just want to sip it, it'll offer more on the palate, but it's still super approachable. Yeah, I enjoy it. It's one that I like to have in my liquor cabinet. It's I mean, if I had to offer comparables to it, I don't know that I would rank it above a Ben Romick. In fact, I'm pretty confident I wouldn't. So what does that mean for a grade? You know what? I think 83 out of 100 for me. It's really good. It's a very, very interesting whiskey, I have to say. And quite frankly, for my money, it is still the best value proposition in the Highland Park range. And I say that having at least sampled, a lot of their limited releases that they put out, their 18-year-old, their 21-year-old, which are all perfectly good and in some respects very good whiskeys. But I sometimes shake my head a little bit at the price points that the older ones go for. And hey, more power to any distiller that can put a product out at a price that a consumer is willing to pay. They're in it to make money as anyone else. I'm not going to hold that against them. But this, I have to say, is definitely still a solid value proposition. $80 for a bottle here in Ontario. It's perfectly fine. I'd like to see it lower. It's still perfectly fine. So, all that being said, recommended. I'm going to knock this out, see if I can figure out a few of these notes, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Cheers, guys.